Topic here is fighting in Asia. At this point, you should have watched the documentary clips in class, so this should reinforce some of that information and help you narrow down the content that you are responsible for. So based on the past 4 classes, where was the Cold War fought? And what I want you to think about here is everywhere. Whether we're talking about the United Nations, whether we're talking about Asia, maybe we're talking about outer space. Basically, whenever these two sides are in a position to go head to head, the Cold War is playing out. So keep that in mind as we transition to Asia with a focus on these 4 places here. So we're going to first begin with China, and the documentary that we watched kind of addressed some of these points. We know that there is unrest after World War II, and that there is a civil war that is breaking out between these 2 parties. So here we have Kai-shek, here we have Mao. So in this situation, we have to pick a side. Notice how the text bubble is in red, text bubble is in blue, and that is intentional. So for the most part, the United States is going to support Kai-shek, and that is going to create a situation where the United States panic. As I said before, whenever you see this image, that is the fear. This is an image from the movie Psycho, and in horror cinema, this film definitely has its place. But for the most part, if there is a threat of communism, that's going to definitely create fear amongst U.S. Politicians. And that's what China Falls does. China falls to communism because Mao is successful at defeating Kai-shek's group. And the fact that China involves a country with a huge landmass and people, there is great fear that since China has fallen, that there are going to be some dire consequences. It looks like the communists are starting to spread their influence. Also, the Russians have just tested a nuclear bomb, Joe 1. So by the time we get to the late 40s, we have China falling to communism, we have the Russians going with their nuclear testing, and this is going to create a situation where the United States is going to have to reevaluate some of its policies. We already have addressed the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan, the Iron Curtain speech. So these are things that we have already addressed. But when China falls to communism, it's different because it looks like everything you believed about with regard to these policies is actually taking place. So China falling to communism, you see the United States adopts some new policies, one being containment, another one being the domino theory, and then they put a bunch of money in the National Security Council 68, which is going to be their defense budget. So China falling to communism sets in motion these events. That's what separates China from the issues that are taking place in Europe. Here we see that the United States is starting to increase its budget, and that is definitely going to feed the military-industrial complex. So you want to go back to your chart. You want to think about China here. You want to think about the nations involved, the immediate threat, the long-term threats, and then the outcome. So the outcome is that China is going to fall to communism. Also keep in mind that both China and Russia have membership within the Security Council of the United Nations. So that is going to be an issue as well. As you know, you are responsible for knowing some of the chronological order. So we'll get to that in a minute. And here we see, again, some more of the impact where the United States, China falls to communism. Again, the U.S. is going to start dumping money into its defense budget to stop the spread of communism or contain it. Here's the order. So you are responsible for knowing what happens. Students, U.S. develops new Cold War policies. Keep in mind, it's saying new here, and the new policies, this is the difference between Europe and Asia. The policies of containment, domino theory, those policies are a result of China falling to communism. So you cannot begin here with this item because that just doesn't make sense. Here we see World War II. That seems like a pretty good start point. And this is going to be the end point. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this one will be 5. So you have to figure out amongst yourselves where the correct order is. But at that point, you probably should be in a position to have some understanding of the sequence. After the video clip that we watched addressed some of the issues going on in Korea, some of the terms specific to Korea, the 38 parallel, I want you to think about this as like a border. And after we watch the documentary, we're going to get to this section here. So just to give you a little bit of information, with North Korea and South Korea, we have World War II. We have a division of Korea. The North Koreans are going to invade South Korea, and their goal here is to unify. They're trying to unify. However, their alliance with China sends a mixed signal to the United States, where the U.S. is thinking, okay, that means that the domino theory is actual, something that can happen. We started with China. Now Korea's starting to fall, so we really need to get involved. So according to the documentary, the United States leads a United Nations force in Korea, and their goal is to try to drive the North Koreans out of South Korea and try to figure out what the solution is going to be to this division of Korea between North and South. And as of 2021, the country is still divided. There are technically two Koreas as a result of some of the items going on, the events in the 1950s. The United States also the documentary also talked about the Yalu River and how China issued a threat that if UN forces proceeded north, that China would take this as an act of aggression and enter the war on North Korea's behalf. So that's probably part of the reason why there is a stalemate. So let's take a look. You want to focus on the role of the United Nations. On the U.S. side, we have about 54,000 dead. For those of you wondering, what is the Cold War, because it actually seemed hot. People are dying, bullets are being exchanged, and so on. So here we have the progression chart. So let's see what we could figure out. Japanese troops leave after World War II. So if we go back to World War II, we know that Japan had attacked China, and they tried to take over Indochina. They primarily were trying to control much of Asia. So you cannot look at Korea without looking at some of the events that take place during World War II. Does Korea begin with the split? That would be a no. So you don't want to go with that particular item here. You basically want to see what else you could kind of weed out here. No resolution, still divided. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's going to definitely have to be last here because that's kind of where we're still at. We know that the North invades the South. So the North invades the South, which is going to prompt the United Nations. So we know that this has to be before this one here. Okay. So we'd have to go Japanese troops are leaving after World War II. Korea is split. At that point, the North invades the South. And you could probably figure it out from that point on. I'm not going to give away everything. Moving on to Vietnam. Students usually get Vietnam and Korea mixed up because we are talking about a division in both. Vietnam is divided at the 17 parallel, whereas Korea is divided at the 38 parallel. So those are your latitude, longitude lines. That's what the 17 and the 38 is a reference to. So with Vietnam, this one is a little different because France had controlled Indochina since the 1800s. So that belonged to France, but we know that France was defeated quick when they were fighting in World War II by the Germans. And we also know that this was also renamed Vichy Indochina. So this definitely has its origins in World War II. Keep in mind, we have watched a documentary on this one as well, so I'm probably not going to say much. You might want to take a look at this progression chart that I have on the site. Here we see Korea, here we see Vietnam. So with Vietnam, there's a war between France and Vietnam. France versus Vietnam. We'll put World War II over here because it happens after World War II. This guy is Ho Chi Minh. He is considered the George Washington for Vietnam. And pretty much what's going to happen is, I'll even go back to World War I. He is trying to advocate for independent Vietnam. Doesn't get it at the end of World War I, doesn't get it after World War II, because Vietnam was a French colony since the 1800s. So now World War II is over. We know that France had been defeated, but the colony goes back to France, which sets off a situation where Vietnam is going to fight a war against the French, known as the French Indochina War. So the French are defeated by the Vietnamese, led by Ho Chi Minh here, and that is where the division is going to take place. So we see a temporary split. Vietnam is divided into two, and both are supposed to elect the leader, and that leader is going to run in an election to unify North and South Vietnam into one Vietnam. So we have North Vietnam, South Vietnam. They're going to have elections, and to keep in mind, this is after the French Indochina War. And so that's really where a bunch of issues start to emerge. The Southern candidate, Diem, will be assassinated. People are going to be upset with the way he ruled South Vietnam. And the United States will intervene at some point when this Gulf of Tonkin incident takes place. So the North, led by this individual, were communists. The South, supported by the United States, were the capitalist side. So it's a little different from Korea, because in Korea, the issue here is that North Korea invades, which prompts the United Nations to get involved, whereas with Vietnam, they're supposed to have an election between these two individuals after Vietnam defeated France, but that never takes place. So we take a look at the progression chart here. We see Vietnam controlled, or Indochina, by the French, which is why we see all of those flags here. Dien Bien Phu is the battle that ends the war between France and Vietnam. You have the 1954 Geneva Accords, which splits the country into two sections. Ho Chi Minh is trying to lead the North and unify his country, arguing that the French have been oppressing the Vietnamese people for years. The South leader, Diem, would be aided by the United States. And as I said, Diem would be assassinated, which leads to a situation where the United States has to get involved. So here's the progression chart. So you want to make sure, like, France is defeated. Are we talking about World War II? Are we talking about the French war with Vietnam? But this says Japanese removed after World War II back to France. But wait a minute. It's a French colony. So maybe this has to go first. They have to first be a French colony. Japanese are removed after World War II. It goes back to France, prompting Ho Chi Minh to fight. And then you could kind of figure out the progression from there. Move on to Cambodia. With Cambodia, you have once again two sides. Here we see Long Nol and Pol Pot. Long Nol is aided by the United States. Pol Pot, I'm just going to put aided by the communists. Debatable, depending on the time we're talking about, if he's being aided by Russia and China. By the time we get to the 70s, Russia and China are really starting, their relationship is starting to deteriorate anyway. So here we see Long Nol and the Khmer Rouge, led by Pol Pot. This is an image of the Khmer Rouge coming to power. Here we see the date. I also want to point out that at the same time when this is going on, the United States is fighting in Vietnam, and Cambodia is right here. So they have a common border. So the Khmer Rouge comes to power in 1975. That is also the same month and year that the United States would withdraw from Vietnam. So the U.S. is up and leaving from Indochina. Here we see an image of the last U.S. aides, ambassadors, allies trying to flee from Vietnam in Operation Frequent Wind. And this is going to signal the U.S. leaving the region. As I said before, the Khmer Rouge is coming to power in Cambodia. The United States had supported this guy right here, Long Nol. And so when the Khmer Rouge comes to power, this photograph here, and the Americans have left, it's time to target Long Nol supporters. Why would you target Long Nol supporters? Well, because during the Civil War from 70 to 75, Long Nol was fighting against the Khmer Rouge, and the Long Nol regime was supported by the United States. And so they're going to target. It's just a civil war. I mean, think about in the Civil War in the United States, and the North fought the South. Let's say if the South won, would they target Northern soldiers? And did the North target Southern soldiers, which is what actually happened, but there doesn't seem to be any genocidal acts after the Civil War. Anyway, so let's kind of proceed here. So Phnom Penh is evacuated. Phnom Penh is the capital. We're talking about this image here. The Khmer Rouge comes to power, and Phnom Penh is evacuated. Why is Phnom Penh evacuated? Well, because the Khmer Rouge argues that the Americans were going to bomb the capital, and it becomes crucial if the Americans are going to bomb our capital that we need to go into the countryside. So individuals are sent to this detention center, S21, and there people are tortured. And they're tortured and asked a series of questions. You see in these images here, I lose track of some of the data. I think it's 7 people actually survived the Tuol Sleng concentration camp, which was a former school. Here you see some more images. So the people that we're looking at committing the torture are the Khmer Rouge, and this is a person that is possibly suspected of supporting Long Nol during the Civil War. And here we see some more images. What was the end goal? Well, with Cambodia, they were going to start off at year 0. They put all of their faith in children, and they felt that the generation that was not anybody not a child, the adults were people who were corrupted. So they're going to put all of their resources in the children because the adults are viewed as corrupt. They cannot re-educate them. And so for the most part, people are going to be forced to farm. And they are going to follow the party, which is known as Angkar. And I'm getting a little bit into the genocide here. Here we see the interrogation at S21. Here we see some of the interrogation questions. I have them on my site. And for the most part, they want to ask questions to know, where were you during the revolution? Whose side were you on? And if you weren't on our side, we have this torture in place for you to figure out where were you. And if not, maybe we'll just starve you. So these are photographs of people sent through that interrogation facility, S21. These are the interrogation questions. And we do end up with a genocide where over 1 million Cambodians are killed. Here we have the killing fields, which is usually associated with the Cambodian genocide. It's a little different from what the Nazis or the Young Turks try to do to the Armenians during World War I. But what we do know is the order. So the Khmer Rouge comes to power. That cannot come before the Civil War. The Civil War would have to come first. But wait a minute, Long Nol is in power. So Long Nol is in power. The Khmer Rouge supported by the Chinese. Now we'd have to have a civil war first, and then we'd have to have them supported. They come to power, and then they implement a genocide. So that's kind of where we are with that. That's it.